Now read this.
Hello and welcome back to Now Read This. Once again, Lloyd Alexander's The Chronicles of Prydain, Book 3, The Castle of Llyr, Chapter 6, The Potions of Glue. At these words, Gurgi set up a wail and rocked back and forth, clutching his head. Taran swallowed his own despair as best he could and tried to reassure the frightened creature. "We can do nothing now but wait for dawn," Taran said. "The Master of Horse cannot be too far away. Find him as soon as you can. Above all, do not delay the search for Eilonwy. I shall seek Prince Rune," he added bitterly. "I have given my oath to keep him from harm, and I cannot do otherwise. But when I find him, I'll rejoin you somehow." He was silent then, his head bowed. Fflewddur was watching him.
"Do not wear out your heart with grief," the bard said quietly. "Mag can't escape us for long. I don't believe he means to harm Eilonwy, but only bring her to Aughrim, and we shall catch him long before he can do that. Rest now. Gurgi and I will share the watch."
Too weary to protest, Taran stretched out on the ground and covered himself with his cloak. No sooner did his eyes close than fears of Aughrim came to torment him. In rage and vengeance, the haughty queen would slay any of the companions who fell into her hands. And Eilonwy, he dared not let himself imagine her in Aughrim's grasp. When at last he dropped into fitful slumber, it was as though he slept beneath a millstone. The sun had barely risen when he opened his eyes with a start. Fflewddur was shaking him. The bard's yellow head stood out raggedly in all directions. His face was pale with fatigue, but he grinned broadly.
"Good news," he cried. "Gurgi and I have done some seekings and peekings of our own. We're not as badly lost as you might think. The truth of it is, we've been thrashing around in a circle. Look for yourself."
Taran sprang to his feet and followed the bard to a low ridge. "You're right. There's the alder grove. It must be. And there, I remember the fallen tree where I lost sight of Rune. Come," he added. "We shall ride that far together. Then you must go ahead and catch up with the rest of the band." Hastily, the companions mounted and urged their steeds toward the grove. Before they reached it, Taran's horse drew up sharply, then bore suddenly to the left. A loud whinny rose from the cover of trees along the shoulder of a hill. In astonishment, Taran slackened the reins and let the horse canter freely toward the sound. In another few moments, he glimpsed a pale shape beyond the foliage. As the steed carried him closer, he recognized Rune's piebald mare. "See there!" he called to Fflewddur. "Rune can't be far. We must have gone by him during the night." Reining up, he leapt from the saddle. His heart sank. The horse stood riderless. At the sight of the other steeds, she raised her head, shook her mane, and whickered anxiously. Fearing the worst, Taran hurried past the mare, while Fflewddur and Gurgi dismounted and raced after him. He stopped short. Before him, in a clearing, stood something that looked at first like a huge straw beehive. Fflewddur by then had come up beside him. Taran raised a hand in warning and moved cautiously toward the strange hut. The conical thatched roof he saw now had fallen away in many places. Rough stones, piled one on top of the other, formed a low side wall, a corner of which had collapsed into a heap of rubble. There were no windows, and the single heavy door hung askew from sagging leather hinges. He stepped closer. The holes in the thatch stared at him like empty eyes. Fflewddur glanced about him.
"I'm not too fond of going up and rapping on that door," he whispered, "and asking whoever's inside whether they've happened to see the Prince of Mona. Somehow it seems the kind of place even Rune would rather avoid, but I suppose there's no other way to find out."
Just then the door was flung open from the inside. Gurgi, with a yell, sought safety by scrambling up a tree. Taran's hand went to his sword.
"Hello, hello!"
Prince Rune, beaming, stood in the doorway. Aside from looking a little sleepy, he appeared quite himself, and altogether unharmed.
"I hope you've got some breakfast with you,"
he added, rubbing his hands eagerly.
"I'm nearly starved to death. Have you ever noticed how the fresh air sharpens one's appetite? Most surprising." Come in,"
Rune went on, while Taran stared speechless at him.
"You'd be amazed how comfortable it is. Surprisingly snug and cosy. Where did the rest of you pass the night? I hope you slept as well as I did. You can't imagine.
Taran couldn't control himself any longer. "What have you done?" he burst out. "Why did you leave the searching party? Count yourself lucky that getting lost was the worst that happened to you." Prince Rune blinked and looked puzzled.
Leave the searching party? He asked. Why, I didn't actually leave it. Not on purpose, you understand. It happened when I fell off my horse, and I had to go chasing after her all over nowhere until I found her near this hut. By then it was getting dark, so I went to sleep. That's only common sense, wouldn't you say? I mean, why sleep outdoors when you can put a roof over your head? As far as being lost goes, Rune went on, it seems to me you're the ones who got lost. Wherever I go, that's where the search is, if you see what I mean. After all, the one who's in command.
Yes, you command, Taran flung back angrily, as you were born to, as a king's son. He stopped abruptly. Another instant, and he would have cried aloud his promise to King Rudlum and his oath to protect this witless prince. Taran clenched his teeth. "Prince Rune," he said coldly, "you need not remind us we are under your orders, but for your own safety, I urge you to stay close to us."
"And I advise you to stay away from strange huts," put in Fluda. "Last time I was in one, I almost got changed into a toad."
The bard shook his head.
"Shun them, huts that is," he said. "You never know what disagreeable thing you'll run into, and by the time you find out, it's too late." "Changed into a toad?" cried Rune, not the least dismayed. "I say, that might be interesting. I should like to try it one day. But there's nothing like that I need to worry about. No one lives here, and they haven't for a long time."
"Hurry then," Taran said, resolving never again to let Prince Rune out of his sight. "We must join the others. We'll have long, hard riding before we catch up to them."
"Immediately," said Rune,
who was wearing nothing but his shirt.
"I shall get my things together."
Gurgi, meanwhile, had clambered down from the tree. His curiosity getting the better of his prudence, he loped across the clearing and thrust his head into the doorway, at last venturing inside with Rune. Fluda and the impatient Taran followed him. It was, Taran saw, as the prince had told them. A heavy layer of dust covered the wooden tables and benches. A spider had spun an enormous web in one corner, but even the web was deserted. On a broken hearthstone lay the charred remnants of a long dead fire. Near the hearth, a number of large cookpots, dry and empty now, had been overturned. Earthen bowls and tall jars, shattered into fragments, were strewn about the floor. Through the holes in the roof, the leaves of more than one autumn had fallen, nearly burying a stool whose legs had broken into splinters. The hut was silent. The noises of the forest did not enter. Taran stood uneasily while Prince Rune fumbled with his gear. Gurgi, fascinated by so many strange odds and ends, lost no time in poking through them. Suddenly he cried out in surprise. "Look! Look!" he called, holding up a sheaf of tattered parchment. Taran knelt beside Gurgi and examined the ragged bundle. The field mice, he realized, had discovered the packet long before. Many of the sheets had been gnawed away, others were rain-sodden and blotted. The few undamaged pages were covered with cramped writing. Only at the bottom of the pile did Taran find pages in good repair. These had been carefully bound in leather to make a small tome, and their surface was clear and unmarked. Prince Rune, who still had not got around to buckling on his sword, came to peer over Taran's shoulder.
"I say," he cried, "what have you there? I can't guess what it is, but it looks interesting. And isn't that a handsome little book? I shouldn't mind having it to put down things I'm supposed to remember to do."
"Prince Rune," Taran said, handing the undamaged volume to the Prince of Mona, who thrust it into his jacket. "Believe me, if there's anything that might ever help you do anything, you're welcome to it." He went back to puzzling over the parchments. "Between the mice and the weather," he went on, "there's not much to make out of this scroll. There seems to be no beginning or ending, but as far as I can tell, these are recipes for potions."
"Potions!" cried Fluda. "Great Bellin, there's something we've little use for."
Taran, nevertheless, continued to scan and sort the pages. "Wait, I think I found the name of whoever wrote them. Glue, it looks like, and the potions, as it says here, are to—" His voice faltered, and he turned anxiously to Fluda. "To make yourself grow bigger. What can this mean?"
"How's that?" asked the bard. "Bigger? Are you sure you haven't read it wrong?"
He took the pages from Terran's hand and examined them carefully himself. When he had finished, he gave a low whistle.
"In my wanderings," said Fluda, "I've managed to learn a number of things, not least of which is don't meddle. I fear that's exactly what this fellow Glue did. Indeed, what he sought was a potion to make himself bigger and stronger. If those are Glue's boots over there," he added, pointing to the corner, "he surely needed one, for he must have been a little fellow."
Half hidden by leaves, a pair of well-worn boots lay on their sides. They were hardly large enough to fit a child, and seemed, to Terran, pitiful in their smallness and emptiness.
"He must have been painstaking," Fluda went on. "I'll say that much for him. He describes everything he did and set down all his recipes quite carefully and methodically. As for his ingredients," the bard said, making a sour face, "I should rather not think about them." "I say," Prince Rune eagerly interrupted, "perhaps we should try them ourselves. It would be interesting to see what happens."
"No, no," Gurgi shouted. "Gurgi wants no tastings of nasty lotions and potions."
"Nor do I," said Fluda, "and neither did Glue, for the matter of that. He had no wish to drink his concoctions until he had some hope they'd work, for which I can't blame him in the least. He went on about it very cleverly. As I gather from what he's written down here," continued the bard, "he went out and trapped a mountain cat, a small one, I should think, since Glue himself was such a small person. He brought her back, put her in a cage, and fed her his potions as fast as he could cook them up."
"Poor creature," said Terran.
"Indeed," agreed the bard. "I shouldn't have liked to be in her place. Yet he must have grown fond enough of her to give her a name. Here he's written it down. Leanne. Apart from feeding her those dreadful messes, I expect he didn't treat her badly. She might have even been company for him, living alone as he did. At last it happened," Fluda went on. "You can see by his writing how excited Glue must have been. Leanne began to grow. Glue mentions he was obliged to make a new cage for her, and still another. How pleased he must have been. I can easily imagine the little fellow chuckling and brewing away for all he was worth."
Fluda turned to the last page.
"And so it ends," he said, "with the mice have eaten the parchment. They've done away with Glue's last recipe. As for Glue and Leanne, they've vanished along with it."
Terran was silent, looking at the empty boots and overturned cookpots. "Glue certainly is gone," he said thoughtfully, "but I have a feeling he didn't go far."
"How's that?"
asked the bard.
"Oh, I take your meaning," he said, shuddering. "Yes, it does look rather, shall I say, sudden. As I see Glue, he was a neat and orderly sort. He would hardly go off leaving his hut as it is now, without his boots at that. Poor little fellow," he sighed. "It only proves the dangers of meddling. For all his pains, Glue must have gotten himself gobbled up, and if you ask me, the wisest thing for us to do is leave immediately."
Terran nodded and rose to his feet. As he did, terrified whinnyings and the sound of galloping hooves filled the air. "The horses!" he cried, racing to the door. Before he could reach it, the door burst from its hinges. Terran clutched at his sword and stumbled back into the hut as a huge shape leapt at him.
Hey, you want to buy something? You can check the description for my books and audiobooks. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content.